Hello, and welcome to the 2023 session on the Jane Engleberg Memorial Fellowship, or JEMF. The attendance code for this session, I believe, is 8947. I'm Flavia Faccio, and I'm speaking with you today in my role as chair of the JEMF advisory group. And at this time, I would like to ask the members of the advisory group to come up on stage. Research is collaborative, so even when we present, we like to be all together up here. So yesterday during the professional issues panel, one of the panelists, Andrea, mentioned the importance of finding our people, and those words really resonated with me. I feel that sentiment is especially important now as our society has grown larger and will continue to grow larger. And while it may seem trivial, for me, that space has been occupied by research. In fact, I think the desire to drive forward evidence generated by genetic counselors for genetic counselor is a thread that unites us here. And so I just wanted to share that and also share that I hope you find your peers, those people that share that passion with you. And if your passion is research, you're in the right place. This is our slides on our conflict of interest, mine and Sarah, who is the vice chair of the JEMF and one of the presenters today, and then our conflict of interest for the entire advisory group. Last year, my colleague, John Quillen, then chair of the JEMF, drafted some beautiful words to describe this award. And with his permission, I'm using his words today. In many ways, genetics is about legacies, what gets passed from generation to generation. Jane Engleberg graduated from Sarah Lawrence in 1973, and she passed away in 1988. Jane was a force of nature, a dandelion holding fast in a field tormented by wind and rain. She was a genetic counseling pioneer with a brilliant mind, compassion for the underserved, and a dedication to self-improvement at a time when genetic counselors had limited opportunities for professional establishment, much less professional growth. She did all of this while battling cancer twice, which ultimately took her life. But dandelions have a legacy. Their flowers wither and are replaced by a ball of fluff and mashed seeds. And once in a while, a child or an adult will gather it up, hold it to their lips, make a wish, and blow, scattering the seeds far and near to root and bloom. Many of us didn't know Jane Engleberg when she was alive. But thanks to a wish and a generous endowment by her husband, Alfred Engleberg, we have been witness to her legacy. We are privileged to share some of that with you today and to also let you know how you too can be part of Jane's legacy. So most of the members of the advisory group are on stage here. We are missing a few, but here's a picture of us with our NSGC board liaison and staff member. This photo was taken in August when we met here in Chicago to evaluate the wonderful proposals that came in this year. I do want to acknowledge that this is a team effort. These members pour countless hours reviewing and deliberating over full member and student proposals, and they do so with a lot of thought and care in mind about the meaning of these proposals for our profession and for the mission of the JEMF. We also cannot do this without the support of volunteers who have taken on the role of application advisors and the support of the NSGC staff. So thank you. So today, the JEMF awards support the projects of full members and student members and recognize publications of scholarly work. 2023 has been a very fruitful year for the JMF. We saw a record number of full member proposals coming in and a steady high number of both student research proposals and manuscript applications. So this year, the odds of receiving an award in any of these categories was about 1 in 8. I also want to add that the proposals that were submitted this year were of great quality. And to those of you who applied and whose projects were not selected, I want to applaud you for your efforts. And I also want to know that the competition was very fierce. So I get to share more of Jane's legacy with you today. And I'm going to begin with the student awards. I am pleased to announce 6 awardees for student research proposals this year. I will read their names, and then I'll ask that we acknowledge their accomplishments with an applause at the end. For the students who are here in the audience, I think many of you are here, I ask that you stand when I call your name and that you remain standing so we can recognize you. So, Liz Hart from the University of Michigan. Simone Hetherington from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. Min-Soo Jung from MGH Institute of Health Professions. Tessa Kolar from University of British Columbia. Travia Alondra Morris from Columbia University. And Catherine Parks from the University of Cincinnati. Congratulations. Okay, moving on to the JMF Student Manuscript Award. This year, the JMF acknowledges the article by Lauren Byers and colleagues entitled Exploring Autistic Adults' Perspectives on Genetic Testing for Autism. This was published this year in Genetics and Medicine. And Lauren, I believe you're here. If you want to stand, well, congratulations. Okay, so for the next 25 to 30 minutes, you'll have the opportunity to hear from 3 full member awardees. We're going to start with Sarah Miller. Sarah is the 2022, that's incorrect, it's 2022 recipient of the JMF Full Member Award. Today, she'll be presenting a final report on her project, which investigated the impact of different genetic counseling service modalities in underserved population. Please welcome Sarah.
Afternoon. Oh, hello. Am I on? Here we go. Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Miller. Thrilled to be here talking to you on behalf of our UT Southwestern program about our final report on our project that has felt like a long time coming. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today. Entitled Genetic Counseling Service Delivery and Outcomes in Diverse and Underserved Populations. And I want to say that this all started from a clinical question. So I'm a clinician, always have been a clinician who dabbles in research. And our clinical question was, we already at UT Southwestern in our safety net hospital populations have been using diverse service delivery models for many years, even pre-COVID. So we were really ready to spin when we had to. And the question that we went to the literature to look for that we really couldn't find very good data on was, as we implemented telephone service delivery in our safety net hospital populations, were we doing best by our patients? Are we serving them in the best way that we can, as opposed to in-person service? And that's really where this all came from, was really wanting to answer our own question and make sure we were doing a good job. So as you look at the literature at that time, in resource-rich populations, there is good data to show that essentially non-inferiority of telephone and video service delivery in comparison to in-person service delivery in a variety of ways, as you can see here. And since it wasn't well published in the data at that point, this is where we really wanted to help answer that question for ourselves and for others that are in this similar space. Importantly, we know that so many, and it's well understood that so many have phone access, right, for medical discussions and for everything else that they do. And we know that millions and millions and millions of people are unfortunately in a low income, low resource situation where they may be very well patients at safety net hospitals and other such types of institutions. And what we also know is that telephone and other service delivery models are imperative to help increase the access, as we've talked about in this conference, for all of our populations to the best of our ability and to do the best for our patients that we possibly can. We wanted to use this type of work to help pave that path, even more so, as many are already doing and hopefully will continue to do if we have the data to show that, again, we're doing right by our patients in comparison to other types of service delivery. So our study goals are as follows. Our primary objectives, looking at patient knowledge, of course, satisfaction with genetic counseling, as well as visit completion of the genetic counseling visit. Secondary objectives, including informed choice assessment, which we'll talk a little bit more about, patient empowerment, as well as test completion and cancellation rates, as we normally collect in our clinical care. So to get into a little bit more detail of the study objectives, to look at those patient and clinical reported outcomes, we used a variety of instrumentation. For the patient satisfaction, we used a well-known genetic counseling satisfaction survey, well-validated. We also, to look at knowledge and attitude towards genetic testing, we actually used the multidimensional measure of informed choice, or the MMIC, which our members of our RQO committee probably have come to know pretty well, as this is in the validation process. We wanted to use the two parts of that informed choice measure to look at knowledge and to look at attitude towards genetic testing. We did pilot this in English and Spanish in our representative patient population to ensure understandability, readability, and make sure that we had that squared away before we started. We also wanted, as I mentioned, to look at informed choice towards genetic testing, and that's with the entire MMIC measure, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as genetic counseling specific empowerment outcomes through the Genomic Outcome Survey, or the GOS, which is an adapted version of the GCOS, which is a 24-question survey, also piloted in our population in English and in Spanish. For clinical outcomes, as we normally record in our data, visit completion, as well as genetic testing completion, failure rates, and cancellation. To look a little bit at our methodology, this was a 2-arm parallel randomized controlled study in our 2 safety net hospital populations that we have well-established clinical practices in for over a decade in Dallas-Fort Worth. And what we did essentially in terms of the process, from a randomization perspective, we actually took the referral queue that our typical referrals are coming into for our cancer genetic counseling services, and we randomized at that time to telephone or in person. At that point, once they were scheduled for their particular visit, that's when study eligibility assessment and then informed consent and getting in touch with the patient happened by the study team. And then at that point, the pre-genetic counseling survey battery was sent to the patient via email, along with telephone reminders to complete prior to the GC visit. After the completion of the visit, we had our post-GC visit survey battery that was sent via email, again with telephone reminders, and then upon completion of study, a small gift card was given. Our hypotheses, specifically that patients in the in-person and telephone arms will have equivalent knowledge and satisfaction to hopefully align with the literature that's already out there in resource populations, as well as visit completion being greater, but testing completion being lower in the telephone genetic counseling arm. Some details about our data analysis are here, and I won't belabor it too much for the sake of time, but importantly, we looked at all of our particular instruments, and we looked at those composite scores and compared them between arms. We also used linear regression and logistical regression analysis for the appropriate outcomes of interest. And we also, of course, controlled for potential confounders and covariates such as age and sex and being affected by cancer as well as being affected by cancer was the last thing I was going to say. So to jump into the results and the overview, this is actually a snip from our upcoming manuscript that we're working on buttoning up for publication. But this is our consort diagram that really outlines from randomization through study completion, some of the numbers there from over 1,700 patients randomized down to our completion rate after getting through that process of 48%. We had 201 completed study participants, 100 and 101 per arm, respectively. Demographics, I know this is a busy table, but I wanted to highlight a couple of things. One is part of the reason that we really wanted to do this work is we know that we have a high volume of patients that identify as speaking Spanish as their primary language, as well as those who identify as Hispanic or Latino, Latina. And you can see that for our Spanish speakers, that was about 50% of our study population, and about 43% that identified as Hispanic or Latino, Latina, pretty well distributed between arms. Also, while we are a program based in a cancer center, we actually have a high volume of unaffected patients, which is noted in the demographics table. And actually, in this particular work, about 70% were unaffected by cancer at the time of the study. So to jump into some more results for genetic counseling and testing, we had 272 individuals who completed study for their genetic counseling visit. You can see the breakdown between telephone and in-person, with a slightly higher completing in the telephone arm at almost 90%. This was not statistically significantly different between arms. We also had, of the patients and the participants who completed study, and elected to proceed with genetic testing, we had slightly higher in the in-person arm versus the telephone arm. Again, not statistically different, which you will hear me say a lot of times here in the next few minutes. And overall, the genetic testing completion rate was about 87%. And importantly, at the time of data analysis, when we had to get to that point, in our telephone arm with saliva collection, many of you in this room probably understand, we did not have all of those kits back and completed at the laboratory yet. And so that was about almost 13% of patients that were all in the telephone arm at that point. This is a breakdown of, in terms of sample breakdown per arm. Importantly, we offered blood sample or saliva sample in both arms, so both in the in-person and in the telephone arm. And so as you might imagine, in the telephone arm, we did see the preponderance of individuals who did elect a saliva collection kit. And based on that, we did see about 40 of those 56 individuals that did complete, but we did see either lack of return of the saliva kit or saliva failure in that group, which then, if you get to the bottom of that diagram, we did see a 74% completion rate, as opposed to the in-person arm, where we did also offer saliva collection. The minority of individuals did elect that, but all of those completed genetic testing 100%. This was statistically significant in terms of the difference there for genetic testing completion. I wanted to show you the instrumentation here briefly, just to show you what we were looking at. For the MMIC, which is a tool that might be new to some of you, this is actually originally validated in the prenatal space and has currently been adapted into the cancer genetic space and is currently being validated. The first measure involved is 8 questions that are knowledge-based questions, and this is what we use for our knowledge assessment tool in cancer genetics. We also had our attitude toward genetic testing piece of this tool, which was 5 questions, as you can see, beneficial or harmful, good or not good. So looking at that as attitude towards genetic testing, which we dive into in a moment. The GOS, or the Genomic Outcome Survey, is a patient empowerment assessment tool that preserves the themes of the 24-question GCOS tool. We did elect to use that in this population just for the sake of trying to increase the likelihood of patients and study participants actually completing the tool and trying to make sure that that was happening to the best of our ability. Well understood the genetic counseling satisfaction survey that we administer to the patients that look at satisfaction with the genetic counselor interaction as well as the genetic counseling visit. So to jump into some of those instrumentation results, importantly, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, we really did not find very many statistically significant differences between arms, which in a lot of ways aligns with our hypothesis and what we hope to see. So looking at the pre-intervention or pre-genetic counseling visit survey tools, what we saw was really no statistical difference in terms of baseline measures of knowledge, and also of good knowledge between both arms as a baseline, as well as attitude towards genetic testing, positive essentially in both arms prior to the genetic counseling visit. Post-genetic counseling visit, what we noted was some interesting observations, but again, not much that was statistically different. We did see fewer participants in the telephone arm that changed knowledge from poor to good compared to the in-person arm. But again, this was a very minor observation. The telephone arm also had a slight decrease in their knowledge score compared to the in-person having a slight increase, again, an observation. And also we saw that the telephone arm had an increase in their attitude score, whereas the in-person had a slight decrease. To keep on the bandwagon of interesting observations, we did see that our telephone arm had a slight increase in their empowerment score from pre to post genetic counseling visit, with in-person having a slight decrease in their empowerment score, as well as the telephone arm having a higher satisfaction score slightly than the in-person arm observation. What was very interesting, and again, this is an emerging tool, but what we did find was that the telephone arm had the most participants that identified as having informed choice about their genetic testing. So you can see about 53% versus 39% in the in-person arm. This approached statistical significance, the closest thing we had. So definitely a major trend that we saw, while it didn't quite achieve that. So lots of things to think about here. I think, again, what we saw was that the outcomes really aligned with what we see in the literature in terms of not really being different between the telephone and the in-person arm, which again, we were glad to see. And really what this tells us is that there is a high acceptability of telephone service in an underserved and diverse patient population like what we have in our safety net hospitals. And we did not see compromise of knowledge or satisfaction between arms in this study. And so what I think this just continues to tell us is that in these populations, we all continue to think about how we can do better in terms of knowing that we have service delivery models that can reach people in different ways to their access points that they have and that they really feel comfortable with without compromising those really essential pieces of our outcomes. We did see a lower genetic testing rate in the telephone arm, and I think we've seen that, right? We've published on it. I know many others have, especially during pandemic days, about getting those saliva samples back, be it failure, be it they're just not coming back. And so how do we do better in these situations? And I think that's something that still necessitates a lot of study. And we have seen an increasing amount of large-scale population screening initiatives in research and in the clinics. And so I consider telephone genetic counseling somewhat of a high throughput service delivery model that hopefully can allow genetic counselors to scale up services efficiently. And also by doing that, being able to make the case for more genetic counselor funded time potentially if we can increase those amounts of patients that we see in an efficient way. And also, while billing for telephone genetic counseling services still has a lot of work to do and there's lots to come there, we're hopeful that continued data to show that you don't see inferiority, you don't see differences between the outcomes as compared to in-person will hopefully keep that conversation going in a positive direction. We had a few limitations in the study. We had a smaller N in terms of 201 completed study participants. So we hope to, more will add to that in the future. We also know that this population didn't represent all identities. So of course the outcomes and endpoints here may not be generalizable across the board. We did see higher dropout by the time that folks were getting through the study process than what we had anticipated when we did our initial calculations. And so that's a point that we did see too. And overall, a lot of work to do to push this forward. Lots of future directions. And I think the things that I'm most excited about are thinking about qualitative analyses that could come from this after this is all said and done, really looking at interviewing these individuals to see what might have influenced their preferences, their responses to the different tools, as well as really continuing the work in the MMIC space, which I know our members of our RQ committee are doing a lot of work in that area, and individuals and groups that are validating this tool across the nation. Really excited for those who might be interested. We would love to talk more about what those opportunities could be to really use this tool further and really understand the trends that we saw in our particular study. There was so much that we learned here, and I just want to highlight a couple of things. How important mentorship and advisory teams are. Can't even say that enough. I did talk about that in my interim report last year and highlighted our mentor, Dr. Cindy James, who is amazing, and if you get to work with her, you will be very lucky. And our advisory team was amazing, and really allowed us to look at things in a different lens with individuals who have a lot of expertise. And surrounding yourself with people that challenge you, our advisory team, our mentor, the people I work with. I can't say how important that is to continue to make you a better professional, a better leader, a better person, and I can definitely say I've attested to that. And as a mid-career genetic counselor at this point, which is kind of weird to say, you really are never too senior to learn new things, and I feel like I'm very much in this category as I have honed some of my research skills, and our team has done the same thing as a part of this process. I have an awesome village, awesome village. And I have to say thank you to my team at UT Southwestern Cancer Genetics. They rock. Many of them are here watching virtually. Thank you for pushing the envelope with me all the time. Specifically, Sayoni Lahiri, I have to shout you out. She should be co-PI. I'm a co-PI with her. She worked with me closely on all things. Our advisory team, who I call out here, got to call out the GCs, Stephanie Cohen and Robin Lee, amazing individuals to work with. And of course, the JEMF advisory group and NSGC for giving us a chance to answer some of our clinical questions with a research lens. Thank y'all so much.
Now I am pleased to introduce Lisa Schwartz. Lisa is the 2023 recipient of the JMF Full Member Award, and today she'll be presenting an interim report on her project exploring the professional identity of genetic counselors.
Hi, everyone. So first, I really want to thank the Jane Engleberg Memorial Fellowship Group for selecting me last year to do this work. It's been incredible to reconnect with the genetic counseling profession and field and get to talk to all these genetic counselors through my research, and it's just been a wonderful opportunity. So professional identity has been defined in many ways, and I've really struggled to some extent to find the one that I think best encapsulates what I'm hoping to explore through this study. And I think this one does a good job. That is a representation of self achieved in stages over time during which the characteristics, values, and norms of the profession are internalized, and resulting in an individual thinking, acting, and feeling like a genetic counselor. And these were the specific aims of my study. First, I wanted to explore what genetic counselors, how they describe their professional identity, and then also find out what are their perceptions as well as their formation of that professional identity. And it really took sort of two parts. One was a scoping review, which I'll talk about in more detail, as well as a thematic analysis of interviews. So, I proposed this scoping review, and truthfully, this group questioned whether or not that was a good idea. Only given the amount of time it would take, and I was like, oh, no, it'll be fine. Well, it's been an enormous task, but it's been a great opportunity for me to delve back into the literature of genetic counseling over the last long time, and also a wonderful professional development opportunity for me as well. And we used multiple databases. We had a number of key terms. Some of these terms have been coming up in our presentations during the conference, including a sense of belonging, social identity, traditional versus non-traditional, calling, vocation, those type of terms. We also were very purposeful in excluding certain things. We said no books or chapters, articles that were written not in English or not based in the United States or Canada, and that were not peer-reviewed were considered excluded. And despite having those exceptions or exclusions, we found over 5,000 titles and abstracts that we had to comb through to make a decision as to whether or not we were going to delve further into them to really identify what the context of professional identity was being discussed in these articles. And we did that. And this was all done through consensus among a group of colleagues who I'll be acknowledging at the end of the talk. And we whittled that down to 500 full text articles, which we have been painstakingly reading. But again, it's been wonderful to read the research that's been done mainly by our colleagues. We divided, for the most part, the articles into core, meaning that the article itself, the purpose was to talk about professional identity, or peripheral, where the focus was really on another topic, but professional identity, we got a sense, was coming out within the article. We also had exclusion criteria. We didn't want the focus or the context in which we were really zoning in on to be focused too much on just role or practice, clinical practice or provision of genetic counseling or the practice setting. And we also wanted to exclude professionalism, really focus more on professional identity. And in this case, we also realized a lot of these articles, because if you think again about that definition I mentioned, ethics, values, there's just been so much written in terms of those issues within our literature that many of them really speak more to the collective of the field of genetic counseling and not so much that connection as an individual to the profession, which is really what we're trying to focus on. So we identified those articles, but not necessarily as ones that we're going to be highlighting in the scoping review. And after all that, we got down to about 80, and we're actually in the process of extracting, which means we're really just delving more deeply, identifying exactly within what context professional identity was discussed within each of these articles. We're further delineating them into what topic area, if they were peripheral, that they seem to really be focusing on, as well as whether or not it was a single person's perspective, which often would be one of the NSGC presidential addresses that were published within the Journal of Genetic Counseling, or the Impactful Moments series that was done a number of years ago. But then, as you can see, there were a number of other topics that were more the focus of the article, but professional identity seemed to come through. And as we suspected, there were very few of these 80 or so articles that really have professional identity as its core, and even fewer that were empirical research studies. And we're making that distinction as well. So that's what's going on with the scoping review. But I've actually made, fortunately, a ton of progress in terms of the interviews as well. We formulated a semi-structured interview protocol that was based partly on the initial results of the scoping review, but also with my advisory board. We had it piloted with some of my colleagues at GW who are experts in professional identity, and we distributed it widely to the NSGC through the Research Digest. Thought that we would need 4 sending outs of these, thinking it might get buried within all of the wonderful research being done by many, many students. But we only had to do it twice because we ended up having an enormous response. We really only wanted about 50 genetic counselors to participate in the interviews, and we got over 80 fill out this intake form. So we definitely felt we hit a nerve with this topic. And I actually, as part of the interview, asked that question, what prompted people to actually participate in the first place. But we did have a few that we had to exclude for various reasons, and then out of the remaining 70 or so participants from the respondents to the intake form, we purposely chose 50 people to interview. And we did this based on trying to make this sample as diverse as possible in terms of many things, including their roles, their practice settings, their years of experience in the field, as well as other demographics. And 21 people remain on the waiting list, so I appreciate your interest, and I'm sorry that we couldn't talk to everyone. But we completed all 50 interviews this summer, which is quite a feat, and they're in the process of being checked against the audio recording for accuracy, as well as being de-identified before we upload them into the software where we'll do the thematic analysis. And the initial code book and that coding will occur within the next several months. So this takes a village. As you can imagine, this was a great team effort. I would like to first thank the interviewees who obviously spent better of 30 minutes to an hour with me talking about their path to genetic counseling, as well as, of course, their sense of professional identity. I have a mentoring team of 2 colleagues at GW who are experts in professional identity, so I appreciate them. I established an advisory board, and they, as Sarah mentioned, are just critical. I've gotten to know a number of colleagues who are here in the audience or online, and I want to do a special shout out to Rachel Mills as well as Isha Kalia, because they have been my champions with this scoping review, which has been quite, again, a bear. So they have been really wonderful. And then I'd like to put a special shout out to a research assistant I was able to hire with the funding from the grant, which is just incredibly helpful. Kay Stenberg. She's a student at GW in a post-bac certificate program in molecular diagnostics, but she's also a prospective genetic counseling student who I've been able to mentor. And so for all the program directors out there, please keep an eye out for Kay's application, because I think there are few other applicants who have had an opportunity to literally listen to 50 genetic counselors talk about their career path and their professional identity. So she has definitely gotten a wonderful experience. And thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Okay, it's my pleasure to announce the recipient of the 2024 JMF Full Member Award, Emily Brown. Emily will be giving a brief overview of her project looking to increase access to genetic counselors in an inpatient setting.
So thank you, Flavia, and thanks to the JEMF committee for selecting us to pursue this research over the next 2 years. Okay, and here are my disclosures. So the kind of impetus for this study really came from our clinical work. As many of the counselors in the audience probably have felt and know, there's a high need for inpatient genetic counseling services, but very few genetic counselors actually practice on the inpatient side. A survey from a few years ago looked at inpatient genetic counseling and saw that only 2 to 3% of genetic counselors practice inpatient, and of those, the majority spend part-time inpatient and part-time outpatient. And we felt that demand very acutely in cardiology at Johns Hopkins. So right now we're limited to really only see inpatients if they're terminally ill, which results in about 2 to 4 consults a month. But we did a needs assessment of the cardiology providers and found that the need was actually 6 times higher than what we could currently provide. So my colleagues and I were talking about this, and one of the genetic counselors I work with, Crystal, said, you know what would be perfect are these genetic counseling videos that we have made. And as a little bit of background, we have made these genetic counseling videos for cardiomyopathy, arrhythmia, and familial hypercholesterolemia for outpatient genetic testing visits as part of an R01 with the PI of Cindy James. And so that led to this application. We have both systematic goals and patient and provider goals and specific aims. From a systems standpoint, we're looking at, does this increase the volume of patients we can reach on the inpatient side if they're able to watch a video visit instead of having to have the genetic counselor go see them in person? And then also looking at time to results. Traditionally they would be discharged, referred to CS, and then we would send the testing. And so does this speed that time frame up? From the patient perspective, we'll be looking at decisional conflict using the SURE scale, and then also a modified MMIC scale, which Sarah talked a lot about, and this time it's been modified for cardiology patients. And then the providers, we're going to be surveying them, looking at accessibility, feasibility, and acceptability of this method. So as I've kind of mentioned, the way the study will work is it's an implementation study where the patient will be referred to us. They will watch the video inpatient. If they decide to go ahead with genetic testing, we will then draw blood and send it while they're still admitted. And then once the results are available, we'll meet with them for a traditional post-test genetic counseling visit, whether that's after they've been discharged or still in the hospital. And then as part of that, we'll also be sending the surveys to patients and providers. As part of the JEMF, one of the aspects is looking at your own professional development goals and how to improve your own skill set. And so for myself, what I'm looking at is improving my implementation science knowledge and also my biostatistical skills. I do want to just acknowledge my advisory board. So Amy Stern, who many of you know is the director of population health genomics and has run implementation science in cardiology clinics before. And then Brittany Murray is the lead cardiovascular genetic counselor at Johns Hopkins and has a lot of expertise in this area as well. Not pictured is my JEMF mentor, Adam Buchanan, who will also be, I'm sure, a very helpful key member of this process.
Okay, thank you, Emily, for your great presentation. I'm going to take the last few minutes here to talk about how you can engage with the JEMF in 2024 and beyond. Oops. So before we jump into all the opportunities that the JEMF presents, let's take a few minutes and just review the mission of the JEMF as this drives everything that we do, and then the different ways that we implement it that you'll see here listed at the bottom of the screen. We're going to spend a few minutes talking more about each one of those. But before we do, feel free to go ahead and get out your phones and flip to your camera, because there's going to be a number of QR codes coming up where you can go for additional information about each one of these opportunities. We hope you'll find an opportunity here that will be a right fit for you in 2024 or in years to come. So the first is a bit of a hidden opportunity. So the advisory group is essentially the board of the JEMF. We're made up of about 10 members, and full NSGC members with research and or grant writing experience are encouraged to apply, and we do that via the NSGC call for volunteers in the fall. Next, the Student Research Award is a research award that's open to genetic counseling students working with a mentor who is a full member of the NSGC. Funding is available in increments up to $500. We generally award about 5 of these, but we have some wiggle room depending on the quality of the applications. And that application is very similar to what students generally have to put together for assignments or other requirements, so not a lot of additional work is required for them. These applications are due in June. Anyone who has applied for that Student Research Award is then able to apply for the Student Manuscript Award. So you do not have to be a winner of that award. You just have to have applied, completed your project, and submitted it and had it accepted for publication. And then you can apply for the Student Manuscript Award. This is a $500 award to one manuscript every year. Lastly, we're going to spend a little bit more time digging into the big award of the JEMF, the Full Member Award. You just heard from our three recent Full Member awardees, and this is an award that's open to anyone who's a full member of the NSGC, and it is a $90,000 award available over a 2-year project period. The application, as you would guess, for this award is a little more in depth, and it includes the research project, professional development, and a mentoring section. And this one is due a month earlier than the other ones. It's due on May 1st. If you're interested in what kind of projects the JEMF funds, these are our funding priorities, which we've just updated slightly just this summer. Next, if you're considering, which we hope many of you are, considering applying for the JEMF Full Member Award, we encourage you to really kind of get moving on those thoughts and ideas and turning that into your proposal and your application, because this is a more in-depth application. And as much as none of us really want to hear it, May 1st of 2024 isn't really that far away at this point. Not to freak anyone out too much, although all those second years in the audience are probably looking forward to May. So this application, like I was saying, is more in-depth, but there are a variety of resources to help folks develop this application. Some of those are on the JEMF website, and then down at the bottom, you'll also see the JEMF email that if you have questions that are not answered elsewhere, we're happy to answer those via email. This is how you also request an application advisor. So application advisors are past members of the advisory group or past awardees who are matched one-to-one with potential applicants. What that relationship looks like is really up to the individual applicant and their needs. It could be to discuss such things as the structure of the proposal, the scope of the proposal, or perhaps something more limited like the budget or the data analysis plan. I want to give a huge shout out to our 2023 application advisors that you see listed here, and those who have been past advisors for us and who we're going to tap again in the future to be advisors for us as well. So I appreciate your attention here this afternoon, and we hope that you have found one of these areas that will work for you, again, either next year or in the years to come. We would like to continue this discussion with you as we head out into the foyer. There is a break session that is sponsored by the JEMF, and I would just encourage you to look for any of the advisory group members or anybody with one of these JEMF buttons, because we would love to talk to you about your thoughts and ideas about becoming involved with the JEMF. Then we'll see you back here at 4 p.m. for the focus abstracts in the afternoon plenary session. Thank you very much.